Hello guys, welcome to our today talk. We'll try to introduce you into a world of purple teaming, which we find very interesting, and a future of computer security and the company's security. My name is Pavel Kordos, and today with my friend Patryk,
Hello.
we will try to show you some basics about purple teaming. Then we will go through a simple purple exercise so you can understand how it works, both sides, and in the end we will probably have some conclusions together. All right, so let's start. And the first, let's define actually what is purple teaming. But before doing that, we first need to know, and probably you already know, the two teams, the red team and the blue team. Let's start from the offensive one, the red one, and what actually red teaming gives to your company. What does it really give you to your company?
A report.
A report, all right. Yeah, so usually your teaming gives you a report, but actually it's dived more into the technical part. So as a result of pen teaming, this is not a penetration test. Red teaming is a process when you try to simulate bad guys scenarios, how they work, follow their techniques, and try to identify the weakest spots in your organization. But actually, during this exercise, you will not have a comprehensive view about your current company's situation. You will not have a complex list of weaknesses and all the vulnerabilities. As a result, you will have some kind of a path how the attacker can get into your network, how they can perform lateral movement, what data can actually access, and so on and so on. And as a result, you have this fancy report, which we have been laughing about a few minutes before that. But this report actually is only a path which was used by an attacker, or at least by testers, but actually may not give you a full scope about the security of your organization. Another story, someone who probably should protect your company. Those are the blue team guys. Blue team guys mostly associated with guys which are just clicking on alerts, but they do more than that. First, they try to observe the current company situation. They look for the logs, and they should probably have a wide scope. They should follow the data sources. They should track malicious activities, but this is not an easy task. First of all, doing blue team is complicated because you got a lot of alerts. And for those of you who have seen an alerts from any monitoring tool like Azure Sentinel or Kibana, you probably know that you count them within millions? Yeah, millions, or at least hundreds of thousands records. Some of the tool, they actually gives you some kind of a hint what's really suspicious and what's not so serious. But sometimes those suggestions, they are not perfect. Like here we go, remote code execution attempt. I would probably consider it at least high. Maybe this is one particular example, not so malicious, but those kind of issues, they probably should be treated with the highest priority. And without proper understanding of those issues, you probably will be very keen to just ignore them or just click on them. All right, approved. Go on, and go on. So this is the first issue. So maybe you should jump into documentation of a software. Maybe you can look for additional information here. But hey, look, this is an official Microsoft documentation which about the pass the hash attack, and pass the hash attack is a pretty serious one. But let's look bottom there. We got official information. If the hash was used from a computer, used regularly, close the alert as false positive. Well, I agree that this probably doesn't mean that this particular workstation has been hacked, but I wouldn't consider that as that easy to mark as false positive. Probably you should investigate more and look more into details, so you can be sure that there are no guests within your network. And we got those two teams. First we got the red team, then we got a blue team, and they have different success measures. Like the red team success is to find the path, to probably compromise your domain, to exfiltrate the data, maybe steal some cache and so on. And when they actually have a success, well, that's great. Blue team, what's the success for blue team? Well, they see everything, they see pretty much everything, they probably got some alerts, which is great. They may find something which is more or less severe, and this is still a success. But none of it is actually your company's success, because when a blue team has got a successful project, well, that's probably sad, because there is a path which attacker can follow. If a blue team has a success, that's great, but it may not give you a proper level of actually of a secure. So is there anything we could do about it to make sure that our company is really safe and that those two teams can utilize their knowledge, their tools, just to make sure that you are actually improving your level of security? Well, in fact, there is at least an idea. It's called purple teaming. So purple teaming is a hybrid solution between red team and blue team. They are working together. Those two teams can be separate. They can be separate, like physical separate teams, or they can be like working together for a short period of time. You can also have a dedicated purple team. It doesn't really matter. It's all about the work schema, not the actual human organization. And because of that, because of knowledge of red teaming, how to actually attack the company, and the knowledge of the blue teaming, how you can actually see something malicious within your company, you can combine those two knowledges, and as a result, maybe really improve your level of security. And you can actually address the real issues and the real paths that attackers follow, and you can be sure that on one side, red team can or cannot launch some kind of tool or perform some kind of attack, and from the other perspective, we can see whether the blue team actually sees that. If not, maybe they can use their fancy tools to go through logs. They can tune them and check what they can do to actually see an attacker. All right, this is relatively easy to tell. In fact, we can now go to something practical. We will show you how it can be really performed, and this will be led by Patryk. Patryk, over to you.
Thanks. So to wrap up what Pavel said, red teaming is not quite a pen test, however it may look like this, but this is a scenario-based, goal-oriented exercise targeted at some crown jewels of the organization, and the red teamers try to show the shortest or easiest or most feasible attack path to compromise the company. While blue team existed long before red teams, and they weren't called by colors. I think the blue is some addition to the offensive guys being red teams. The combination is called purple team or purple teaming. And during this talk, we would want to go through a practical exercise of purple teaming to show you what's that really about. So we'll start with analyzing a malicious document, Word document with a macro, to see an example attack path, to map actual TTPs leveraged by this malicious document, and to map them to my true attack framework. Then, based on those TTPs, we will plan a simulation scenario, develop simulations for those specific TTPs, and then execute them in a controlled environment, and finally we'll try to detect the malicious activity using Elastic Stack.
Let me interrupt you for a second, but is this macro issue, can it be some kind of APT group attack scenario? Is it a real world one or rather the lab one?
I think it's a lab one, because we don't have time to dissect seriously obfuscated stuff, so we prepared some rather simple document just to show some malicious techniques used in that, and this would be easy to dissect in a few minutes to actually extract those relevant TTPs from this piece of code.
Alright, let's go.
Okay, so we have some kind of malicious macro. Let's see how it does exactly here. Maybe to zoom in a little bit. So first we have some variables, then some hex data, as we can see, and then this is decoded with XOR encoding and with hex decoding, and the password is seen here clearly. So let's say this document is a little bit deobfuscated by us initially, so it's easier to read. And let's see what it does here. So first we have some URL, then XML HTTP object is created to issue an HTTP request, probably to download some stuff, and then this stuff is saved to a disk. So maybe let's decrypt those suspicious strings. So the first one is a URL to invoke Kerberos tool. So this tool is downloaded and then saved using the second variable, which is a path to disk, and this file is then saved on disk. So that's the first part of this macro. So we can here identify some TTPs. So first is data obfuscation, second one is data download, so malicious tools downloading, and third one is dropping a file to disk, and then see what's going on next.
Before we go further, maybe Patryk, you can just briefly describe why it is important to just maybe divide the code into a smaller pieces, those TTPs. Why it is important? What it gives us? What ability?
Yeah, sure. We'll go to that, but it's just about splitting the malicious actions into atomic, so undividable actions to simulate each one and to train preventions, detections for those specific techniques. So we can split this macro, which is a set of TTPs, into some basic TTPs, which is, for example, file download, some malicious encoding, some process creation, etc., and then test each one of them to see if we can detect this malicious activity, and later, for example, if we can correlate some actions to find the actual attack. But now we are focusing on very atomic stuff here.
It also gives us a great ability to tune our detection resources, because if we will treat this, let's say, macro as a one single big object, we probably won't be able to catch everything. But if we take a look at it as a series of actions, like a smaller actions, first let's maybe download the macro, second drop the file on the disk, then run something again, then run something different, then maybe launch some program within a specific parent process. We'll go about it a little later. It gives us a great ability to properly tune our detection tools. You will see about it later today.
Yeah, that's right. So going further with the macro, here we have some actually COM object instantiation, and it's called by its CLS ID, and this is called share browser window here, and this object allows us to execute some shell commands. So the thing with COM objects is that they can have some specific methods shared, or specific parts, let's say fields of those objects can have other fields, and they can have specific methods. So with this shell browser window, we have a sub-object called document, then another object nested called application, and then this application object have a shell execute method, which requires some parameters. Here is a process name, here are parameters, and we can see some base64 encoded stuff going to be executed by PowerShell, and working directory, and information to hide the window or not. So it's not hidden here, but an attacker would obviously hide this window so it won't be visible.
PowerShell encoded command probably looks suspicious for us. You can then make a note on that and go back to this a little later.
Yeah, sure. So actually we can try to see what's in this command here, leveraging CyberChef again. So after decoding this and decoding with specific encoding for Windows, which is UTF-16, we can see some PowerShell script here. So what it does is to bypass anti-malware scripting interface with some clever method, which is called MC-init failed. Then it executes our script, which was downloaded to disk, and then invokes this Kerberos function.
Why you just want to use a one-liner for that?
Well, this would be blocked by MC itself. So this MC bypass.
That's the antivirus evasion pro tip. If you want to make a note, you can just make a note right now.
Yes. So that's some clever technique, and it's also obfuscated because if we try to use this MC bypass in one line, it gets blocked by the MC. So we would need to split those in few lines, so each line would be executed after another, and then this won't be blocked by the anti-malware scripting interface. So then we could easily execute the invoke Kerberos script, because without this MC bypass this would be blocked. So that's some simple yet clever technique to bypass MC here and execute the Kerberos attack.
Everybody loves Kerberosing.
Sure. So this is it for the macro. These are helper functions for ZOR encryption, decryption, and hex decoding, which were used here. So to wrap up, the macro downloads some file, save this to disk, and execute the PowerShell command while bypassing anti-malware scripting interface. And of course, the data is decoded here, so it's not visible at the first sight what's exactly going on here.
So for those of you who understand this piece of code, you can actually make a little challenge for yourself. You can try to count how many particular TTPs we will be able to actually simulate in a few seconds. So a few seconds for you to count them, and we will go with this in a second. Alright, and we are back. The little challenge is over, and those are the TTPs which you probably will, have been able to identify, or if not yet, you will do in a few seconds. Patryk, maybe you can
go through them? To wrap up what we have identified while analyzing this malicious document. First of all, some assumption here that this was delivered by phishing, so it could have been delivered as a spare phishing attachment to a user.
No one thought about that, right? Because it somehow it need to be delivered, right? So this macro has to somehow land on the employees or user workstation. So this is actually the first TTP which we can see there.
Yeah. So the second one would be actual execution of the file by a user, for example, tricked by some fancy message in the email. Anyway, user executed the file, and we also would try to simulate this part. And going to some more specific TTPs. First of all, we noticed PowerShell execution, Visual Basic, of course, the VBA macro itself. Another thing is obfuscated information in the file, so those base64 strings and hex encoded data. Inter-process communication, and this is about the usage of COM objects. Impairing defenses, so this MC bypass we've seen, this tricky one. And the last one is actually what the PowerShell script does. So this is a Kerberosing attack, so this falls into a category of stealing or forging Kerberos tickets.
What are those T numbers on the left side? Because we use those T1566. What are these?
Yeah, so this is just a mapping to MITRE attack matrix, which is a common, let's say, common language for what we do for purple teams, but also red teams and blue teams. So this is some cool categorization of typical attacker adversarial techniques and tactics.
Yeah, this matrix just divides all of the different layers of attack into smaller pieces. So if you previously didn't have a chance to go through that, we highly recommend that because it's some kind of industry standard for that. Alright, so we got this TTPs. Let's maybe do something a little more technical now and try to plan our simulation, which we'll do in a few seconds.
Yes, sure. So going through all those identified TTPs, let's talk about how we could actually simulate them to see if our environment could be protected from those specific atomic attacks, or if we can detect them. So the first thing is the mentioned spear-phishing attachment. So we could simulate this, for example, by bombing a mail gateway with some malicious documents generated by a tool, and there are a lot of open source tools for that available on GitHub. So for example, Clippy, Macroshop, Lucky Strike, and tens of others. Second TTP was actual malicious file execution by the user. So let's simulate this by just dropping the malicious document on the disk. Third one is PowerShell. So we have actual two simulations here. First is PowerShell with encoded commands, which is very typical for adversaries, for some malicious actions originating from macro or other scripts. And another thing is PowerShell downloading a file from the web. So we will simulate here how does it look like if PowerShell is downloading some data from the internet, and how can we detect this. For Visual Basic, we'll try to simulate a Word application spawning PowerShell process, because that's how some macros work, and that's some cool indicator when a PowerShell process or CMD process is created by Word or Excel. That's not very typical, so probably associated with some kind of attack. So let's see if we can detect this. Obfuscated data, this would be simulated by this PowerShell encoded commands. So this will cover the obfuscation. COM objects, we'll simulate creating an instance of COM object and using this to execute some commands in PowerShell. Impairing defenses, so we'll simulate the MSI bypass just as it was done in this malicious macro. And then Kerberos thing. So instead of using the invoke Kerberos script, we could dive a little deeper and see how this works. So actually, Kerberos attack is just requesting TGS tickets, and we can use the .NET class called Kerberos requester security token for that. And this is just how exactly the invoke Kerberos tool works.
So just a little remark from me today. We will focus only on the seven techniques. We will not cover today the phishing one because we would like only show you the more technical part. But actually, don't forget about this phishing and this like gateway monitoring or any other internet activity monitoring. This is also useful. We will not do this today, and today we will also want to cover the PowerShell downloading a file from a web, because it could be done within different layers, which we will describe in a few minutes. But this is also those network sources, like a gateway and mail system. They can also be a source for your blue team and for your detection tools. So don't forget about that. Alright, so we got a plan. Let's now develop it and use our tools to do that.
Sure, so this is my favorite part of the whole purple teaming concept. So and the most interesting one, I think. So for those simulations, for dropping a malicious document on a disk, we can just simulate this by dropping some malicious file on the disk and see if it gets locked, and how can we do with that later. Encoded commands, it's simple also. So just run PowerShell, create PowerShell process with parameters of base64 encoded command. And simulating a web activity, we can leverage invoke web request commandlet for that. For testing, simulating Word application spawning PowerShell, we can use some simple VBA code which just executes PowerShell. For COM objects, we can create an instance of the same object that was used in this malicious macro from PowerShell, and then use this to execute some process. See how it looks like in logs. MSI bypass is just the same one-liner, but actually in one line, which was used in the malicious document. So we will use this for simulation. And for Kerberos, we will issue a single TGS request to the domain controller to see how this is logged.
So please keep in mind that those code pieces, they come directly from the macro which we shown you before, and they have been separated so we can observe each level. We will not just run macro and see does it work, do we see anything. We just split that within smaller pieces so we can step by step see each step of execution, like first dropping file, then running, then object initialization, and then some script launching. So each of these particular steps can be observed, or maybe cannot. We will see that, but probably can be observed, and because we divided into that smaller pieces, we can see actually more than just run this macro and see, oh, do we have any connection, or run it in a sandbox and oh, I don't have any IP, then the file is secure. So we got these code pieces directly from the previously shown macro. And now the lab time, the favorite one.
Sure. So actually, not everything is just copied and pasted from the macro. Some are different, but try to simulate similar behavior. And one particular example is simulation 4. Actually, when we used this COM object to spawn PowerShell process, the parent would be Explorer, not the WinWorld, but using this basic shell command of VBA to spawn another process, the parent for PowerShell spawned via the method in simulation 4 would be winword.exe.
It was a spoiler. Spoiler alert. Come on.
Sorry.
Alright, let's go to the lab. And welcome back to our very simple purple teaming virtual lab. Today we will use Kibana, which will support us within a log investigation. And this very simple lab consists of one workstation, which is actually a domain controller, but doesn't really matter. We are interested about the results, not the particular machines. So, as you remember, we identified 7 TTPs, and the first one is actually dropping a file on a disk, and we will do that. But dropping this file isn't a job for antivirus. Why we actually are interested in logging that?
Yeah, sure. So let's imagine some malicious document is dropped on a disk. So this is, as Pavel mentioned, the job for antivirus or some EDR. So this would be immediately blocked, if not properly obfuscated to bypass antiviruses. But and also we cannot create an alerts based on file creation, I think, because there are lots of events like that. But anyway, if possible, we could log those file creations for later reference. For example, while investigating some incident during incident response process, we could go back to this data and see that at specific time a file was dropped in, let's say, downloads folder, and then a few minutes later it was executed, and 1 minute later this Word process created PowerShell process, and then this was followed by some malicious activities. So this event of file creation on disk would may be helpful for such an investigation for us.
So actually, the more you log, the better. It doesn't really mean that the more you have in your tool, the better. It's all about properly tuning this tool to exfiltrate what actually is important for you from the other, let's say, background noise. But logging that, as Patryk said, could be useful for any kind of forensics to actually see what happened, because we can go back and follow the attacker's path. And as simple as that, we are able to use our event ID parameter inside of our Kibana tool. And just using event ID 11, we got 8 hits within the last actually 10 minutes, because this is the time the lab is working. And let's have a look inside one of these logs. And as we see, this file sample doc file was just dumped in a secret location on my desktop. But anyway, it gives us ability to follow the execution path and maybe support our forensic activity. This is not connected with scanning it inside of antivirus solutions, because this is a different story. But for analyzing, this is also a great knowledge source.
And also worth noting that this is Sysmon event ID 11, which is file creation here.
Yeah, all right. You can also tune Kibana to have alert on that, but probably having alert on each particular file could be a tremendous to go through. But even without alerting, we are able to go back and see what happened inside of our machine. All right. So let's go to the second TTP, which we previously identified, and this second TTP would be PowerShell with encoded command. So we're gonna launch that on our machine, and this is very basic who am I command, as you probably see. And if we will now go to our Kibana tool, we can filter those kind of requests. For this, we used first the event ID, which is process creation, and then we looked for the process name, which was, as you remember, PowerShell, and we got a couple of hits. And this one is pretty much it. Very catchy eye will probably notice that Kibana has already have this rule name. This is not something which Kibana gives you by default. It actually comes from a Sysmon, from a package called Sysmon Modular, and you can actually manipulate that. Those are some predefined rule techniques, so don't stick on that yet. But it actually kinda match our situation now. But if we will browse to the bottom, there is something which we'll be probably interested in. And first we see that there is this process PowerShell, and above you see that this PowerShell has been launched with encoded command parameter. And if, for example, you would like to tune your Kibana tool to capture those kind of TTPs, you probably may want to have it a little more detailed. So in this particular case, you can also add some regular expression to this parameter process command line, just to capture only those encoded command executions. All right. Simple as this. Then the third one, which is actually a PowerShell downloading a file from a web, but just like we said before, we will not focus today on the networking part. This of course could be also launched and could be visible from it's a Google could be visible as a network activity, depending on which technique you actually use, or maybe not you, but the attacker will use. There can be like a different artifacts for that, but just like we said, we won't focus on the networking part right now. Alright, and TTP number 4, we will spawn PowerShell from a Winword, and this could be done, of course, from a malicious macro, this particular line.
Yeah, so to simulate this TTP, we could just simply create a Word document and put this one line in macro, so when executed the word would spawn a PowerShell process.
And if launched, we can see if we are able to capture that. And to do that, we can look for parent process name, which in our case, if we will just scroll to the bottom, we can spot. Apologies. Lab is not always that dynamic as it looks. Alright, so in this case we got this parent process name, which is WinWord, and if we look just above, we see that the process actually is PowerShell, so it means that Word is actually spawning a PowerShell, which is definitely not the behavior you would expect in a regular working environment, right?
No, so that's not like some office work. Yeah.
Even if you use macro, you probably won't be launching PowerShell from macro. So this is a pretty good indicator that some malicious macro has been launched, and you can correlate those two kind of activities and have alert and see those kind of things. All right, the simulation number 5, the COM object.
Okay, so this is actually what was done in the macro, and as I mentioned, spawning a process using this COM object and shell execute function would give a parent of explorer.exe. So the parent of the CMD would be explorer, and parent for notepad would be CMD here.
And we see that the empty notepad has been launched. Let's look into our Kibana if we are able to see that. By the way, if you want to have like a very quick query to just verify for the particular TTP, it's always great to have those saved queries for the future. If you have some parameters which you'd like to filter, it's very useful. Like I use in the moment, we have a couple of predefined queries, which really improves our work. And in this case, we will observe. First the event ID, and let's go to the bottom. We see that we are actually able to spot our part of macro.
Sure. So it's easy to spot here because it was executed in a single line, and we can in this single event we can see everything that was executed, but I don't think it's that easy to spot a COM object creation. So for this we would need to dive deep into logs, for example, for PowerShell logs here, because I don't think that COM object instantiation is logged just like that.
All right, and your pro tip for our viewers: how to disable MSI, and let's try to disable that. I just hope the Defender is already off. Yeah, it's off, and as you can see, it worked. Let's check whether we are able to see that in our Kibana.
So one thing about enabling or disabling antivirus. So here we disable Defender to just purely focus on detections, but while assessing the environment, specifically preventions, we would leave any such solutions on. So for example, we would see that this particular technique was blocked by Defender, by the MSI itself, but now we are focusing purely on detection, so we just removed the Defender from the equation, and we can focus on what's being logged here.
Yeah, and we see we get a hit. We have our function right there, and this is a great example. While just like you shown before, if we will use split that command within multiple lines, if for example some blue team will have a regular expression for that particular query, if you will just make a few lines and not a one-liner, regular expression will probably not catch that easy. So this is actually the pretty tricky part, but as you can see, you are able to do that. This is also a great example why you actually perform a blue team, because in most cases you probably will just launch that and check whether do you see that. Is it so often that you or see what you expect to see in your monitoring tool, Patryk? Do you think?
Probably not.
Probably not. So it's always great to launch that, see whether our detection capabilities are good enough to see everything. If not, make some tuning, redo the test, make some tuning, redo the test, and so on and so on. Once you are satisfied with the results, so you have a very good example. This is a very good example for this particular, like the essence of the purple team. All right, and the last one, the Kerberos link.
So as we mentioned before, we could simulate the Kerberos link attack with this invoke Kerberos tool or script, but what we can also do is dive deeper into the script itself and see that it issues just a raw TGS request using this Kerberos requester security token class of .NET and use this to simulate the activity. And that's also this essence of purple teaming Pavel mentioned just a second ago. We can start our attack simulations from the simplest, most obvious techniques. And for example, the invoke Kerberos tool could be detected just by monitoring executed commands, but a more clever attacker would perform Kerberos link using this tool, but maybe renamed, so it won't be just called invoke Kerberos, but let's say invokes something non-malicious. So the simplest detections would fail. And going further, advancing our offensive and also defensive capabilities further, we could simulate the Kerberos link by executing TGS requests in longer time periods, because the invoke Kerberos tool just issues those requests one after another, and the monitoring could catch this easily, because there would be like 10 or 20 or more requests for TGS tickets in short time periods. So this could be definitely some alert for that. But a clever attacker would simulate or execute Kerberos link in longer time periods. For example, one TGS request, then to wait a few minutes and another request, and so on. So this simple correlation would not see the Kerberos link attack performed in this longer time frame. So advancing the offensive capability, we would need to advance our detections to actually catch this attack.
So in our case, we just used a very simple event ID filter. We just filtered the particular event ID. And for those of you who are familiar with the Kerberos link, there are some kind of specific things when it comes to Kerberos link you can actually spot on. And one of which is the ticket encryption, which kind of differs when you perform a Kerberos link from the regular ticket request. And you can also use that knowledge just to spot that within your logs.
But also there's some tricky part with this encryption type, and actually Will Schroeder, Harmjoy, did a great article on that on his blog, and he just dove deep into how Kerberos works. And the bottom line is it's not that easy to disable the default encryption of RC4, and some let's say legitimate TGS requests could also use this type of encryption, but for Kerberos link specifically we would need to use RC4 encryption to crack those tickets faster.
Alright, and we are back to the PowerPoint, and we've finished our lab. We've performed a couple of great activities, and as you've seen, we were able to find pretty much everything. Of course, this is a very simplified scenario, because within our lab environment, you probably won't have this background noise, which will be a big headwind for all of this purple teamers and blue teamers, just to exfiltrate the proper things out from the logs. So maybe Patryk, you can wrap up what we actually did to detect our
Sure. So
activities.
let's go through all of the scenarios, and first is dropping the malicious document on a disk. So as we mentioned, just a good antivirus could catch this, but if the file is let's say properly obfuscated, this won't be enough. So Blue team would need some file creation events for incident response or threat hunting purposes. The second one was PowerShell with encoded command. So here we could leverage some tricky regular expression to catch such invocations of PowerShell. And one thing to note here, it's enough actually to put the -e parameter without the whole encoded command part, and then this is base64 encoded stuff, because that's how PowerShell works. So it could be either -e or -enc encoded or whatever. The third thing is network connectivity, so this could be logged by some firewall, IDS, IPS inside your network, or also by Sysmon, which logs network connections and also the process from which the connection originates. That can be also useful. Fourth scenario is executing spawning PowerShell process from Word or Excel or similar applications. So for that we would check the Sysmon event 1 or Windows event number 4688. And the thing with Windows event is that I think from Windows 10 the actual parent process name is logged, but before only the parent process ID was logged. So the ID is not very useful for the analysis. We would need the whole parent process name to see what was going on actually. Fifth thing was the COM object instantiation. So here if this was done by PowerShell, we could leverage the PowerShell script block logging and, for example, grep for the specific CLS ID associated with the shell browser window COM object. And MSI bypass, this is tricky one when executed by this one-liner. Firstly, it would be blocked by the MSI itself, but when it comes to detections, we could also filter logs for MSI or MSI init failed or something like that to maybe catch such events, such commands executed. And the last thing is Kerber roasting. So the most relevant event ID for Kerber roasting is those associated with the ticket creation, ticket requests.
Alright, and that was pretty much everything we have prepared for you today. One last word from us. If you are seeking for additional knowledge, there are a couple of great frameworks to follow when it comes to purple teaming, one of which, the most known I guess, is the Atomic purple teaming framework, right? It gives a great ability to perform such actions inside of your environment. Actually, building your own purple lab is not that tough. It's just very simple Kibana to install one log machine, one domain controller, maybe some kind of router in the network, and that's it. So what we encourage you to do is actually to try to apply it inside your organization, see what actually do you see. If you don't see anything, tune your tools and redo the test One final word from you, Patryk?
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching and stay healthy, of course. Hope you enjoy our presentation. Goodbye.
Bye.